The desert sleeps beneath a silver sky. A low wind moves across the sand, brushing against ancient stones that have stood for longer than memory. The stars above are quiet, but once long ago they were maps. And here, under their fading light, the Great Pyramid rises like a forgotten mountain. It feels less like something built and more like something revealed. But what if it wasn't built by the civilization we've always credited? What if this structure, so precise, so immense, was already standing when the first pharaohs looked upon it? What if it belonged to an age lost beneath floods, buried in sand, and erased from the textbooks? In school we learned that the pyramids were built around 4,500 years ago during the Golden Age of Egypt. But some researchers see signs that challenge this. Erosion marks shaped by ancient rains, star alignments pointing to skies long vanished, and myths that whisper of forgotten architects. Could the pyramids be older than civilization itself? Older than writing? Or even agriculture? Tonight we follow the clues, not to find a final answer, but to rediscover the question. Because sometimes the stones remember what history has chosen to forget. If stories like these call to you, consider subscribing and joining us on this quiet path through forgotten worlds. And as we begin, where are you listening from tonight? Let us know, wherever you are in the world. You arrive before the first light touches the sand. The stars are still out, pale blue, flickering above the horizon like distant campfires. The air is cool, cooler than you'd expect from the desert, and everything feels paused. Even Cairo, just beyond the haze, seems to have quieted its breath. You stand at the edge of the Giza Plateau. The shapes are there, silent, black against the sky, rising like forgotten mountains. The pyramids. You've seen pictures, maybe even visited. But in this hour, this hush before sunrise, they no longer feel like landmarks. They feel like witnesses. The wind slips past your ears like a whisper in a language you once knew. It carries the scent of sand, stone, and something more. Something like time. The kind of time that doesn't tick or measure. The kind that settles, that waits, that forgets. You walk slowly. The stones beneath your feet are ancient, not just in years, but in presence. They don't feel like they were built. They feel like they were always here. There is a stillness to this moment that cannot be captured in words. It settles into your chest. It presses gently on your breath, and for a flicker of a moment, you feel it. As if beneath this desert, beneath this sand, something vast is sleeping, something older than memory, and it has not yet stirred. Let us now turn our gaze to the mystery itself. We are told in textbooks and timelines that the pyramids were built around 4,500 years ago, crafted by the ancient Egyptians of the 4th dynasty. And perhaps they were. That is what the evidence suggests. If you only look at certain kinds of evidence. The official story is one of brilliance, but also of order, of kings and quarrymen, copper tools and calendars, aligning perfectly to raise the most iconic structures ever built by human hands. A proud tale, a linear tale, a clean tale. But history is rarely clean. And in the desert, beneath stone and silence, another story lingers, one that does not fit so easily within the margins of dynastic records or archaeological consensus. Because what if the Egyptians did not build the pyramids? Not all of them, not entirely. What if what we see today, those massive blocks, those perfect alignments, that impossible scale, was not the work of the 4th dynasty, but the inheritance of something far older? What if these structures were already ancient by the time the pharaohs found them? What if Khufu did not build the Great Pyramid, but merely claimed it? There are whispers of this idea, not loud, not proven, not even accepted by most scholars. But they persist. Whispers in the erosion of the Sphinx. Whispers in the procession of stars. Whispers in myths too old to remember, and in technologies that do not belong. We do not begin with answers, only with a question. And that question is simple, but shattering. Could the pyramids be older than history itself? According to accepted Egyptology, the Great Pyramid of Giza was built around 2560 BCE during the reign of Pharaoh Khufu, the second king of Egypt's fourth dynasty. It was, they say, a tomb, a monument to power, the culmination of decades of labour, designed by brilliant architects and raised by tens of thousands of skilled workers and seasonal farmers. The casing stones, now mostly gone, once gleamed white in the sun. The pyramid itself was the tallest human-made structure on Earth for nearly 4,000 years. It points astonishingly, almost perfectly to true north. Its base is level within a fraction of an inch. The precision is breathtaking, and so is the effort to explain it within the tools of its time. Mainstream archaeologists tell us this was possible through copper chisels, stone hammers, and careful planning. That ropes, ramps, and manpower, scaled at unimaginable levels, were enough. They cite nearby workers' villages, the logbooks of quarrying, and the stele of kingship as proof. And yet, even within the boundaries of that official narrative, there are seams. Why would a culture's first attempt at pyramid building be its greatest success? Why are there no clear inscriptions inside the Great Pyramid? Why do subsequent pyramids decline in quality, crumbling, incomplete, or poorly aligned? Why does the Great Pyramid feel like a starting point for something that had already been mastered? There is a discomfort in these inconsistencies, not loud, not scandalous, but lingering. A quiet resistance from the stones themselves. The story we are given is not a lie, but perhaps it is a simplification. Perhaps it is tidy because we need it to be, because if the pyramids are older, if they predate the pharaohs, if they were built before the rise of known civilizations, then everything shifts, not just the date, but the shape of our history. And so we return to the wind, to the sand, to the silence, because somewhere in the stillness, the first riddle is waiting. In that silence stands a statue, half buried, half erased, facing east into eternity. Let us now turn to the Sphinx and what it might remember. The Sphinx watches the horizon. It has always watched. Even as dynasties rose and fell, even as the desert shifted and the air grew drier, it stayed, silent, half buried, eroding not from time alone, but from something far more ancient. At first glance, it is easy to overlook the Sphinx enclosure. Tourists focus on the face, worn and lion-like, or perhaps something older. But the body rests in a trench carved down through the bedrock, and it is here, in this hollow of stone and shadow, that a quiet revolution began. In the early 1990s, geologist Dr. Robert Schoch visited the site. He was not an archaeologist. He came not to interpret statues, but to read stone, to examine the weathering patterns etched into the walls of the enclosure. And what he saw did not match the textbook story. The rock was rounded, smoothed. It bore vertical channels, undulating grooves, not the sharp flaking lines one would expect from desert winds and sand-blown abrasion. No, this was something else. This was water. Schoch compared it to similar erosion found in cliffs and quarries exposed to heavy, sustained rainfall, the kind that comes not from flash floods, but from centuries of storms. Not from the Egypt we know, but from the Egypt that once was. Thousands of years ago, the Sahara was not a desert. Rain fell in sheets. The land was green. Rivers ran where now there is only sand. This was the African humid period, long before the Old Kingdom, long before Khufu. And so Schoch suggested something unthinkable, that the Sphinx, or at least its original form, may date not to 2500 BCE, but to 7000 BCE or earlier, maybe even before 10,000 BCE, before writing, before Egypt, as we know it, existed. His conclusions were met with resistance. Archaeologists pointed to the absence of inscriptions, the style of the face, the nearby temples. But Schoch wasn't reading glyphs, he was reading geology, and stone, unlike paper, does not forget. The Egypt we imagine, the Egypt of pharaohs and sand, is dry. It has been dry for a very long time. Desert winds carve the dunes. The Nile is a thin blue thread through a golden plain. Rain is rare. When it comes, it vanishes quickly, and yet, the Sphinx tells a different story, not in words but in the language of erosion. Mainstream Egyptology holds that the statue was carved during the reign of Khafre, around 2500 BCE, but by then Egypt was already arid. The Sahara had long since turned to sand. There simply wasn't enough rainfall, not in volume, not in duration, to explain the rounded grooves, the deep channels, the soft undulations in the bedrock walls. Wind erosion leaves a different signature, sharp horizontal abrasion from airborne grit. But what we see in the enclosure is vertical, soft, like fingers of rain running down clay again and again for centuries. Climatologists studying North Africa confirm this. Rainfall levels during the Old Kingdom were higher than today, but only slightly. Certainly not enough to weather limestone this way. To find such a climate, one must go back much further, to the African humid period, between roughly 9000 and 4000 BCE, and perhaps even earlier. During that time, monsoon patterns shifted northward. Vast lakes appeared. The Sahara bloomed with grasslands, rivers, and even forests. People lived where today there is only dust, and they carved things. Is it possible then that the original form of the Sphinx, perhaps a lion or something else entirely, was shaped during that wet, forgotten age? The tools would have been simple, stone against stone, the hands many, the time abundant. And then the rain stopped, the green withdrew, the sky closed, and the Sphinx, once standing in a field of grass, began to fade into sand. It would be uncovered much later, reclaimed by dynastic kings, reshaped, perhaps even refaced. But by then its story was already older than memory. As we drift forward in time, the desert returns. But before it came, there was something else. A land of water, of rivers, of breath. Let us step into that world, before it was lost. Try to picture it. The Sahara, not as a desert, but as a sea of green. Grass rolling toward the horizon. Rivers curling like silver ribbons between scattered trees. Cattle grazing. Fires flickering at dusk. And in the distance, something carved from stone, already watching. This is not imagination alone. It is drawn from data. From pollen trapped in lake beds, from satellite scans of ancient riverbeds, from cave paintings that show boats and hippos where now there is only sand. The African humid period transformed the landscape. It created lakes larger than modern nations. It fed valleys. It offered life. And if the weathering of the Sphinx truly dates to this period, then someone was there, not just passing through, not hunting and gathering, but carving, planning, shaping stone into symbols that would outlast even their own names. No one knows what the original Sphinx looked like. Some say it was a lion, guarding the horizon, echoing the stars. Others suggest a jackal, or a strange hybrid of beasts no longer remembered. The current face, worn and human, seems smaller than it should be, as if recut, as if reshaped much later onto a body that had already stood for centuries or millennia. If this is true, then the Sphinx is not just old, it is a palimpsest, a sacred monument reinterpreted again and again. Dynastic Egypt may have inherited it, worshipped it, restored it, but not created it. And in that possibility lies a deeper mystery. Who then came before? Who looked at the limestone bedrock and chose to carve a Watcher of the East in a time when rain still fell and the Sahara still breathed? We have no names, no writing, only stone and memory. Close your eyes for a moment and try to forget the desert. Forget the blowing dust, the brittle heat, the endless yellow plain. Imagine instead a place alive with green. Rolling grasslands stretch to the horizon. Rain falls softly and often, turning low hills into rivers and dry basins into lakes. Birdsong drifts on the wind, and where you now find only rock and sand, there is motion. Animals grazing, trees swaying, and people walking along riverbanks that no longer exist. This is not fiction. It is the Sahara as it once was. Between roughly 9000 and 4000 BCE, and possibly even earlier, this region was transformed by the Earth's shifting orbit. What scientists call the African humid period brought powerful monsoons northward, turning much of the Sahara into a savanna. Lakes formed where satellite scans now reveal dry basins. Rivers carved through what is now called desolation. In some places you can still trace their paths, ghost rivers beneath the sand, winding like veins across the land. One of the largest was Lake Megachad. At its height it was larger than the modern Caspian Sea. In its shallows life thrived. Crocodiles, hippos, fish, and human settlements that are now buried. Traces remain. Stone tools, burial sites, traces of paint clinging to cave walls. And among those caves we find something quietly extraordinary. In places like Tassili in southern Algeria and Gilf Kebir along the Egyptian border, there are ancient artworks, thousands of years old, that depict scenes impossible to reconcile with the current landscape. Figures in boats row across flat water. People swim. They herd long-horned cattle, chase wild game, and gather in rituals. This is not the life of scattered desert wanderers. This is a world of organization, memory, tradition, a culture rooted in the rhythm of rivers and rain. And if such a world once existed, flourishing for millennia before the dynasties of Egypt, what might it have left behind? We often imagine civilizations as synonymous with cities, stone monuments, or writing. But perhaps this was a different kind of culture, one that did not build upward, but outward. Not a pyramid builder yet, but a people of movement and memory. And yet, they worked with stone. They carved, they shaped, and perhaps they marked their passing in more permanent ways than we realize. Because when the green began to fade and the waters receded, they didn't vanish all at once. The climate didn't shift in a day. It happened slowly, like breath being drawn back. Lakes shrank. Rain faltered. The rivers that once danced across the landscape dried into silence. Those who lived through this change faced a difficult choice: stay and adapt to an increasingly hostile land, or leave, following the water eastward toward the Nile. And many did. In the archaeological record, we begin to see the Nile Valley swell with new life not long after the African humid period begins its slow retreat. It is tempting to believe that this migration carried not only people, but ideas. Knowledge of astronomy, of seasonal timing, of working with stone, and of organizing labor in vast, coordinated ways. Perhaps they brought memories too, of structures, of markers, of sacred places now buried beneath the desert, or of stories. Stories of a time when the gods lived on earth, when the land was green, when the stars above matched something carved below. Maybe it was these people, or their descendants, who would one day plant the seeds of what we now call Egypt. But there is another possibility. What if some of the stonework predates even this migration? What if certain structures, not just tools or paintings, survived from the time when the Sahara still bloomed? It is here that we return to Giza. The limestone used to build the core of the pyramids is filled with the fossilized remains of ancient marine life. Shells, coral, creatures from an ocean that vanished tens of millions of years ago. But that's not the part that stirs the imagination. It's the shaping of that stone, the scale, the orientation, the placement. It feels deliberate, not just as architecture but as memory, embedded into geology itself, not to be read but to be felt. Even the erosion around the Sphinx suggests exposure to climate long gone, to the kind of rain that would have danced on grasses now turned to dust. And if that's true, if part of what we see at Giza existed during the African humid period, then it may be the last monument of a forgotten age. Not the beginning of Egypt, but the end of something that came before. A culture that did not need cities, that did not leave scrolls, but that, in the final years of its twilight, turned to stone, as if to whisper through the coming silence, to carve something into the earth before the earth turned away. And so when we look at the pyramids today, at the massive limestone blocks weathered by sun and time, we may not just be seeing a feat of engineering. We may be seeing the afterglow of a land that once breathed with life, water, and meaning, and the final memory of hands that touch stone under a different sky. The desert would come, slow and patient, but some chose to stay and to speak in granite. Let us now turn to what they may have left behind, not in myth, but in the stone itself. Stand close to the base of the Great Pyramid and you'll notice something difficult to explain. Not the scale, though that alone is staggering, but the feeling of precision. The blocks, worn and battered with age, still sit with astonishing alignment. Some of the joints are so tight that not even a razor blade can slip between them. This is not rubble piled into a form. It is engineering. It is intention. Each limestone block at Giza weighs between 2 and 15 tons. And then there are the granite blocks, red, hard and far more dense, brought from quarries over 500 miles away in Aswan. Some of these stones weigh over 70 tons. They were hoisted, fitted and placed deep within the pyramid's core, especially in the so-called King's Chamber. And somehow they were positioned with such accuracy that the chamber remains stable, aligned and acoustically resonant over 4,000 years later, if not longer. Mainstream Egyptologists explain this with enormous effort and patience. Copper chisels, stone pounders, ropes, sleds and manpower. And it's possible, but there are details, quiet ones, that linger like puzzles at the edge of that explanation. Among them are the tool marks. On certain granite blocks, deep within temples and passageways, we find striations that curve, spiral, or plunge directly into the stone. They resemble the marks left by drill cores, as if something had bored into the granite with a steady, rotating motion. These aren't surface scratches. They spiral deep into one of the hardest materials on Earth. And then there are the saw marks, long, straight grooves, as if a blade had passed through the stone with rhythmic force. But granite is not soft. Cutting it cleanly, especially at that scale, requires not only hardness, but control, pressure, consistency, speed. Could copper tools and sand really achieve this? Some say yes, with enough time and enough labour. Experiments have shown that copper saws, mixed with abrasive sand, can leave marks on limestone. But granite? That's another matter. Modern engineers who've examined the surfaces have hesitated, not to declare conspiracy, but to acknowledge anomaly, because the marks suggest efficiency, repetition, as if the builders had tools, not necessarily high-tech in our modern sense, but different, advanced in ways we don't yet understand. Consider too the geometry. Many corners in Giza's temples are perfectly square. Some stones are cut with as many as 12 angles, all meeting with crisp precision. There is no mortar, just friction, just fit. How does one achieve this again and again on massive stones weighing dozens of tons? And why? Why build to such impossible tolerances unless you needed to? It's not just the cutting. It's the lifting, the aligning, the shaping, at scale. Some researchers, standing in these chambers, have wondered aloud. Are we looking at the first monuments, or the last remnants of a forgotten age of builders? If there was a time before the rise of recorded dynasties when certain knowledge of stonework, of resonance, geometry, balance, was known, passed down, perhaps even ritualized, then the pyramids may not just be tombs, they may be the last echo of a language written in form, not hieroglyphs, but alignments, frequencies, fittings that never loosen, shapes that never shift. To the orthodox scholar, these anomalies are footnotes, curiosities, exceptions, but to others they may be fragments, not of science fiction, but of forgotten engineering, not alien, not magical, simply lost. Lost to flood, to sand, to time, but not entirely, because the stone remembers. The marks are there if you know how to see them, carved into stone not as art, but as artifact, a language of cut and groove, curve and slot, left behind by tools we do not possess or do not recognize. The granite blocks in the heart of the Great Pyramid are not alone. Elsewhere across the Giza Plateau and far beyond it, similar clues appear, in temples, in passageways, in quarries. In the unfinished obelisk at Aswan, still attached to the bedrock, scoop-like impressions line the sides of the granite, as if something had gouged and lifted the stone with deliberate rhythm. They curve with the shape of the hand, but deeper. Too deep, as if shaped by a tool designed not merely to chip, but to grind or even melt. Just enough to part the grain. No such tool has been found. There are also the drill cores, smooth cylinders of granite pulled from blocks as if by hollow shafts spinning with consistent speed. The marks spiral tightly, as if whatever bored into them did so with ease. Copper and sand again are offered as the answer, but the pressure required, the precision of angle and entry, these are not the marks of an improvised method. They are the signatures of confidence. Then there are the flat surfaces, polished, levelled, squared, some so finely smoothed that they reflect light even after millennia. In the Osirian at Abydos, a deep sunken structure built from enormous granite blocks, the surfaces shine with such cleanness that they feel alien to the age assigned to them. But perhaps they are not alien. Perhaps they are simply remnants of an era not preserved in text, but in texture. Because stone is slow to speak, but slower to forget. And this silence has led some researchers to speculate. What if the tools weren't lost, but simply misunderstood? They may not have been metallic. They may not have left behind obvious machinery or engines. They could have relied on principles now outside our daily view. Vibration, sound, resonance. Not lasers, not electricity, but something rooted in the earth itself. Acoustic shaping, electromagnetic guidance, or pressure systems built from principles we've dismissed as myth. It sounds fanciful, but is it more fanciful than the idea that tens of thousands of workers hauled hundreds of thousands of multi-ton stones, some from hundreds of miles away, using nothing but sleds and rope? The mainstream explanation requires monumental will, but no anomaly. The alternative asks for anomaly, but opens a door. One doesn't need to accept wild theories to feel the shape of the question, because even the most grounded engineer standing before these cuts, these joints, these gleaming planes of ancient granite may quietly admit, we don't know how they did it, and maybe we were never meant to, or maybe once and we did know, but that knowledge was passed down orally, sacred, hidden, and when the last master died, and the rains stopped falling, and the stars no longer aligned, it faded, not erased, just unwritten. And so the pyramids, and the stones around them, remain, not just as buildings, but as questions. Each groove, each impossible fit, each untouched surface becomes a trace, not of aliens, not of gods, but of craft, of skill refined across generations we've forgotten how to count. And perhaps in the deep hush of night, when the wind moves gently across the plateau, they still hum. Not with sound, but with memory. Let us walk now into alignment, not of stones, but of stars. For above these monuments, another geometry awaits, written in constellations. There are nights when the stars over Giza seem too still, as if they too are monuments, pinned to the black above, just as the pyramids are anchored below. And it is on these nights, when silence deepens, that a strange idea takes root. That the pyramids and the sky are speaking to one another. For centuries, observers have noticed something peculiar in the layout of the three great pyramids at Giza. Not in their height or volume, though each differs, but in their position. From above, the placement of the three structures seems to echo a celestial pattern, the belt of Orion. This idea, formally explored by researcher Robert Bauval in the 1990s, is known as the Orion correlation theory. He proposed that the positions of the pyramids, two aligned closely, the third, offset slightly, match the relative positions of the stars Alnitak, Alnilam, and Mintaka in Orion's belt. The correlation is not perfect, but it is suggestive. Suggestive enough to stir curiosity and unease. Because Orion was not a random constellation in ancient Egypt. He was Osiris, god of resurrection, lord of the afterlife. And to the ancient mind, as above, so below, was not a metaphor. It was architecture. The orientation of the pyramids adds another layer to the mystery. The Great Pyramid is aligned almost perfectly to true north, within 3/60th of a degree. This level of precision is difficult to achieve even today, especially without a magnetic compass. And yet, they did it. Or someone did. How? There are theories. Some suggest the use of stellar observation, marking the rising and setting of circumpolar stars across time, refining the angle year by year. Others propose shadow tracking or water levels used to level the base. But again, it is the why that echoes louder than the how. Why align to the heavens with such devotion? Why mirror Orion? Some suggest the answer lies not in religion, but in memory. That the stars served as a kind of timestamp, a map not only of the afterlife, but of the past. Because here is where the theory grows stranger. According to astronomical software, and to the slow wobble of the Earth's axis known as precession, the arrangement of the Orion belt stars would have most precisely matched the pyramid's layout, not in 2500 BCE, but around 10,500 BCE. That date again, the edge of the last ice age, the beginning of the Younger Dryas, the return of the rains, or perhaps their final withdrawal. Was this intentional? Were the builders, whoever they were, encoding the sky of their own time? Or pointing backward, preserving a memory of the stars as they once were? It is impossible to say. But it is difficult to dismiss the feeling one gets standing beneath that same sky, that the alignment is not accidental, that the earth and the heavens were meant to reflect each other, not symbolically, but structurally, and perhaps the pyramid itself, with its sloping sides, its inner chambers, its upward-pointing angles, was never merely a tomb. Perhaps it was a mirror, or a bridge, or a question sent into the sky, waiting for an answer that would take millennia to hear. Because when you stand at Giza on a cold, clear night, and the stars of Orion rise behind the Sphinx, you feel something beyond narrative. You feel design. And in that feeling, the past becomes more than chronology. It becomes geometry, an echo written in light and stone. The stars shift slowly, but so do rivers, and winds and memory. Let us now step back in time to a Sahara that was still alive and flowing. The sky is not still. Though it looks eternal, frozen above us like a painted dome, it moves. Not quickly, not in ways we feel, but slowly, subtly, with the long breath of the earth itself. This motion is called precession, a gentle wobble in the earth's rotation, like the slow turn of a spinning top. It shifts the orientation of the planet's axis over time, changing the position of the stars in our sky across thousands of years. One full cycle takes roughly 26,000 years. To the human eye, it's imperceptible, but to those who build in stone, it can be marked, and perhaps that is exactly what was done. If you were to stand before the Sphinx today, at dawn on the spring equinox, you'd watch the sun rise directly in front of it, an alignment long noted by archaeologists. But what matters isn't just where the sun rises, it's what rises behind it. Today, the constellation Virgo lies on the horizon in spring. But roll the clock backward, not centuries, but millennia, and the sky changes. Around 10,500 BCE, the constellation Leo, the lion, would have risen due east, directly in line with the gaze of the Sphinx. A lion, watching a lion. Coincidence? Perhaps. But the Sphinx already raises questions. Its body is undeniably feline. Its head is small, possibly recut from an earlier eroded form. Some researchers suggest it may have once been a full lion, carved when the stars above mirrored its form below. And if this is true, then we must ask, why build a monument to match a moment in the sky, unless you lived beneath that sky? The pyramids too seem to speak this language. Their orientation, their proportions, their geometry all suggest an awareness of celestial motion, not just where the stars are now, but where they were, or where they would be. To track precession, one must observe for generations. To map it in stone, one must think not in years, but in epochs. What kind of culture does that? One obsessed with time, not as calendar, but as cosmos, one that sees the sky not as backdrop, but as blueprint. Many ancient myths speak of a time when heaven and earth were closer, when gods walked among men, when stars and stories intertwined. The Egyptians said that Osiris came from the stars, from Orion, and returned there after death. The ancient Hindus wrote of yuga cycles, ages of rising and falling consciousness tied to cosmic motion. The Maya, too, built their pyramids to echo the heavens, tying earthly life to celestial rhythm. These are not isolated coincidences, they are echoes. Memories perhaps of a way of knowing the world that we have lost. And in the monuments of Giza, we may be seeing one final expression of that worldview, a belief that the earth and the stars are not separate, but part of the same great turning. The sky was different then, the air too, cooler, cleaner, no light pollution, no satellites, just the deep black and the slow glittering of stars in their great procession. Imagine standing at Giza 12,000 years ago, no city behind you, just open land, and ahead 3 pyramids, or something like them, already rising, and Orion above, bright and unblinking. It doesn't need to be true, but the idea lingers, because something about these structures, their stillness, their precision, their reach, suggests they were made not just to endure time, but to speak to it. The sky holds its records, but so does the land. And far to the south and west, the desert holds a memory of its own, not in stars, but in caves. Let us return to the Sahara, when it was still a sea of green. Before it became a desert, the Sahara was a canvas of life, not just once, but many times over the great cycles of climate that have shaped this planet. And in one of its most extraordinary transformations, between roughly 10,000 and 5,000 years ago, this immense expanse of sand was something entirely different, a savanna, a world of rivers, lakes, animals, and people, a world that now survives only in memory and in stone. We know this not because of legend, but because of the ground itself. Beneath the sands lie the dry beds of vanished lakes so vast they would dwarf some of our modern seas. Lake Megachad, for example, once stretched over 150,000 square miles. Fossilized fish bones, hippo remains, even crocodile fossils are found far from the Nile, in places that today know only drought. Ancient drainage networks, great river systems have been revealed through satellite imaging. Subsurface radar has traced their paths, winding, branching, intersecting, forming a skeleton of water beneath the desert's skin. In the remote regions of southern Algeria, Libya, Chad, and Sudan, there are caves. And inside these caves, on the walls of rock long sheltered from the sun, people painted their lives. At Tassili N'Ajjer, hundreds of feet above the desert floor, you can still see them. Figures dancing in ceremony, cattle herders with horns and robes, swimmers, arms outstretched, bodies arched, kicking through painted water. Boats, always the boats. These images, some over 8,000 years old, speak not only of survival, but of culture. They show a people not just hunting or fleeing, but belonging. They depict communities rooted in rhythm, the coming of rains, the rising of grass, the seasonal swell of water. What they do not show is panic or collapse, which is why their silence becomes haunting, because eventually the rain stopped, not suddenly, but gradually as the Earth's orbit shifted once again. The monsoons retreated southward, the Great Lakes shrank, the rivers ran dry, and the people? Some surely stayed, adapting as long as they could, but many must have moved, drifting east and north in search of water. Some of them, archaeologists believe, would settle along the banks of the Nile, and so, before there was Egypt, before dynasties, crowns and hieroglyphs, there was this migration, a slow wave of memory carrying the knowledge of life on the land, of rhythm, of the sky. Perhaps they carried with them more than survival, perhaps they carried ideas, early understandings of time, of stone, of structure, maybe even memory of monuments, because just as these people painted boats in the middle of the Sahara, they may have remembered other things too. Sacred sites, Sacred shapes, sacred alignments. And it is here that we begin to wonder, what if these painted swimmers, these cattle herders and sky watchers, were not the ancestors of a culture that would one day build pyramids, but the descendants of one that already had? A civilization that once flourished in the green Sahara before the desert came. A people who shaped stone in ways we no longer understand. And when the world around them changed, they left what they could, not in books, but in cliffs, in geometry, in stone. If that is true, or even partly true, then Giza is not an origin. It is an echo, a last song of a forgotten age, carried eastward by people whose names we've never known. And maybe the Nile became a kind of refuge, a new cradle, the next chapter, one built on the foundation of a deeper past. Even today, archaeologists find settlements deep beneath the desert that challenge the accepted timeline. Stone circles, complex burials, signs of organization not expected in that time or place. And yet, we cannot fully map this memory, because the desert has reclaimed it, the wind has buried the roads, the dunes have swallowed the lakes, the sun has bleached the paint, and still, the memory lingers, in the rocks, in the dry riverbeds, in the constellation of ruins scattered like bones beneath the sand, and in the paintings, the boats keep moving, gliding across vanished waters, holding something we no longer remember, but still feel. A story, perhaps, of how a land once full of life gave way to silence, and how the silence still speaks. The silence continues, in stone. Let us return to the Nile, where echoes of that migration may have reached their peak, not in water, but in shape, and in purpose. It is often said, with certainty and repetition, that the pyramids were tombs. Specifically, the Great Pyramid of Khufu at Giza is taught as the final resting place of a mighty pharaoh, buried with treasures, sealed forever in stone. But what if that is only part of the story, or not the story at all? Step inside the Great Pyramid and you won't find painted walls. There are no relief carvings, no hieroglyphs announcing the deeds of the king, no murals of gods or spells to guide the soul. It is silent, stark, emptied of ornament. In the so-called king's chamber, a single granite box sits near the centre. It has no inscriptions. It is too large to have fit through the passageways that now lead to it, suggesting it was placed during construction, not after. The chamber itself is surrounded by massive granite beams, stacked with precision, arranged to absorb pressure. Above it, a series of stress-relieving chambers. Architectural features far more elaborate than one might expect for a mere coffin. But there is no body. No mummy has ever been found inside the Great Pyramid. No funerary equipment. No royal insignia. Just the box. And the silence. Other pyramids, especially later ones, do contain inscriptions, burial goods, and mummies. They speak of Osiris, of resurrection, of the pharaoh's journey through the stars. But the Great Pyramid does not speak. It hums. Engineers and researchers have noted the acoustic properties of its chambers, particularly the resonance inside the granite sarcophagus. When struck or spoken into, it vibrates. Tones echo along the stone walls. The frequencies are not accidental. Was this intentional? And if so, what for? Some speculate that the pyramid served a different purpose entirely, not as a tomb, but as a machine. A structure built not to hold the dead, but to interact with energy, sound, vibration, perhaps even the earth itself. At the heart of this idea is not mysticism, but geometry. The pyramid's base, when measured precisely, encodes dimensions of the Earth, the radius, the equator, the polar circumference. Its height relative to its base suggests the ratio of pi. Its location, near the 30th parallel, is aligned with the planet's landmass center. It is not just large, it is positioned. What kind of culture calculates such things? Some propose the pyramid functioned as a kind of resonator, amplifying natural energies from the Earth's crust. Others suggest it was a structure of initiation, meant to elevate consciousness through sensory deprivation and vibrational experience. Still others believe it may have preserved or transmitted something, not information in the modern sense, but something older: stability, rhythm, memory. Of course, these are only theories. The mainstream view still holds the pyramid as a tomb, whether looted or never completed. But the lack of definitive evidence leaves room for wonder. Why so much effort for a burial? Why chambers so precisely aligned to celestial and cardinal points? Why features that seem architectural, not ceremonial? Why build something so massive, with such engineering complexity, for a single man's death? Unless the purpose was not death at all, unless it was life, or time, or rhythm, or even preservation, not of a body, but of knowledge. It is tempting to compare the pyramid to a monument, but perhaps it is more like a metronome, or a tuning fork, or a message, waiting. Some researchers believe the builders knew something about frequency, about resonance between stone and human consciousness. They point to the use of granite, rich in quartz, which can store and transmit energy under pressure. They point to the precise internal angles, the ventilation shafts aligned with stars, the pyramid's orientation to true north. They point, in short, to design. And design implies purpose, but we cannot say for certain what that purpose was. We can only listen. And perhaps that is the point. Perhaps the pyramid was never meant to be understood all at once, but over time. As the stars moved, as the earth turned, as memory faded, and so it sits still on the edge of Cairo, not as a riddle, but as a rhythm, not dead stone, but tuned silence. And within that silence, something lingers, something that does not need language, only stillness, only time, only attention, and maybe that, more than anything, is its true purpose: to invite us to listen, not just to stone, but to ourselves. And as we listen, the echoes travel farther, past myths of burial and death, toward older stories. Stories of water, of upheaval, and of floods that swallowed the past. Let us now follow those waters. Stand on the high ground near the Nile and look out toward the north, toward the Mediterranean. Beneath the shifting soils and floodplains, beneath cities and roads and farmland, lies another Egypt, one few ever see, a submerged world. And beyond the river, far out to sea, are the ghostly outlines of cities: Canopus, Heracleion, parts of Alexandria, swallowed by time, silt and water. These were not accidents of erosion. They were collapses. The earth moved, the sea rose, the memory sank. But perhaps it wasn't the first time. All around the world, stories speak of a great flood. The Epic of Gilgamesh tells of a man warned to build a vessel, to carry his family through a deluge sent to cleanse the world. The Bible echoes this tale with Noah. In India, the Matsya Purana describes a giant fish who saves Manu from rising waters. In Mesoamerica, the gods send floods to end the age of the wooden people. Aboriginal Australians speak of oceans rising to reclaim lost lands. The myths are not the same, but their rhythm is water, destruction, survival, loss. And in the last decades, science has begun to uncover what myth remembered. At the end of the last ice age, around 12,800 years ago, the Earth entered a sudden and violent phase of climate disruption. This period, known as the Younger Dryas, saw temperatures plunge in the northern hemisphere, even as massive glaciers were already melting. And then just as quickly, the world warmed again. In a matter of centuries, or perhaps decades, sea levels surged by over 100 meters. Glacial lakes burst their natural dams. Coastlines were redrawn. What had once been dry land vanished beneath the sea. This was not a single event, but a global series of shifts. A planet in upheaval, and humanity caught in between. Many archaeologists view this time as a pivotal moment, a transition from the Paleolithic to the Neolithic, from hunter-gatherers to early farmers. But what if it was more than that? What if it was also a forgetting? If any cultures had flourished along the ancient coastlines, building, storing, organizing, their cities would now lie deep beneath the sea. Their ruins buried beneath silt and sediment, unreachable except by the most sensitive sonar. And what survived would be the highlands, the hills, the things built in stone far from the tide, like the pyramids, or like the myths. Because if such a flood happened, not once, but again and again, then memory would shift from record to ritual, from written text to story, from fact to metaphor. The Sumerians remembered kings who reigned before the flood. The Egyptians spoke of the Shemsu-Hor, the followers of Horus, who ruled in an age before dynasties. The Greeks dreamed of Atlantis, lost beneath the waves. And all around the globe, old traditions point to a time before, to a world washed clean. But memory, like water, erodes. It smooths edges. It softens names. It merges meanings. Until we are left with fragments. A ruined wall beneath the Mediterranean, a submerged road off the coast of India, a perfectly cut block found far from any known civilization. We call them anomalies. We place them in museums. We explain them if we can. But sometimes they feel like something more. Artifacts not just of lost cultures, but of lost contexts. And perhaps the pyramids, sitting as they do on the edge of land and sky, serve as anchors, not just to kings but to epochs, to stabilize time, to hold memory in place, even as the world moves. Because water always moves. It rises, it falls, it reclaims. But stone endures. And it is in the meeting of those two elements, water and stone, that something eternal is whispered. Not a story of one flood, not a warning, but a rhythm, a cycle. The earth remembers even when we do not. And sometimes when we listen closely, when we walk through chambers tuned to frequencies we can't explain, or run our hands along grooves that seem too precise, we feel it. That beneath the pyramids, beneath the myths, beneath even the sand, there is water, there was always water, and with it the memory of what came before. The waters may have taken much, but they left behind traces. Let us now look beneath the Nile itself, where even more may be waiting, unseen, unheard, unknown. The Nile moves slowly now, a patient ribbon of water winding northward, indifferent to the ruins it passes. It has carved its way through time as much as space, a current carrying more than silt, more than life. It carries secrets. We think of the Nile as exposed, its banks studied, measured, excavated. But beneath its steady flow lies another layer, a deeper Nile, not of water, but of memory. Sediment builds slowly over centuries. Flood after flood lays down a film of earth, hiding what was once surface. And just as forests can swallow cities, rivers can bury civilizations. Much of the Nile Delta, the vast fan-shaped plain where the river meets the sea, has never been fully explored beneath the topsoil. Modern cities have risen atop older ones. Concrete covers layers of mud brick. And below even that are stones. In the late 20th century, divers off the coast of Egypt discovered something astonishing: the lost city of Herakleion. For centuries it was believed to be legend, a kind of Egyptian Atlantis, mentioned only in passing by Greek historians. But it was real. Submerged beneath 30 feet of water and sand, Herakleion revealed itself slowly. Temples, statues, ceremonial boats, inscriptions. Massive columns, still standing. Stone doorways, swallowed by the tide. It hadn't been washed away in a single catastrophe. It had sunk gradually, victim to liquefaction, tectonic shifts, and the slow rise of the Mediterranean. But it reminded us of something important. What we see today is not the full Egypt. It is only the high ground. We often forget that ancient civilizations built near water. Rivers meant life, trade, irrigation, power. So if there were cities before dynastic Egypt, before Narmer, before hieroglyphs, the most likely place to find them would not be in the desert, but beneath the Nile. And yet excavation is nearly impossible. The water table is high. The land is dense with modern life. The cost, both logistical and political, is daunting. But still, some researchers persist. Using ground-penetrating radar, remote sensing, and sonar, they've begun to glimpse anomalies beneath the surface. Geometric patterns, buried walls, subsurface voids. None are confirmed, but they suggest something we've long suspected, that our picture of ancient Egypt is built atop layers we have yet to uncover. Imagine, beneath the bustling streets of Cairo, a foundation of forgotten temples. Imagine stone chambers sealed beneath the fields of the delta. Imagine stairways descending into darkness, now filled with water and silt. These are not fantasies, they are possibilities, and the earth, as always, is patient. In 2007, near the city of Saqqara, a site already famous for its step pyramid, a team of archaeologists uncovered a new tomb. They hadn't been looking for it, they were drilling for something else. What they found was sealed, untouched, buried deeper than expected. It had never been looted. Its paintings were vivid. Its walls still held the voice of a man long gone. It reminded the world that Egypt still hides itself, not out of malice, not out of mystery, but because it has so many layers. And what if some of those layers are not Egyptian at all? What if beneath the Nile's slow drift lie the remnants of a culture far older, the one whose memory was carried eastward from the dying Sahara, or northward from lands now undersea? We assume that everything began with writing, with names, with record. But what if the beginning is not where we've placed it? If sea levels were lower 12,000 years ago, the Nile's shape would have been different, its mouth broader, its floodplain wider. Any people living then, farming, building, shaping, would have done so on land that is now drowned, eroded, or buried beneath meters of river silt. We may never find them, but perhaps that is the nature of old things, to remain quiet until the time is right, to wait beneath mud and memory, and perhaps the pyramids themselves were built not just on the edge of the desert, but on the edge of forgetting, so close to the water, so close to the line between what we see and what we've lost. The Nile may still be hiding the roots of something deeper, but the stories we've inherited speak of those who came before, not as kings, but as watchers. Let us now meet the ones whispered of, the followers of the first ones. In the early king lists of Egypt, before the names of recognizable pharaohs appear, there is something strange, a gap, a space filled not with silence, but with memory. These are the so-called pre-dynastic rulers, figures who reigned before Nama, before unified Egypt, before written language. Some of them are gods, some semi-divine, some are described only in fragments as those who came before. Among them are the Shemsu-Hor, the followers of Horus. They appear in texts like the Turin King list and the writings of Manetho, an Egyptian priest historian writing in the 3rd century BCE. He described them as beings who ruled for thousands of years, long before the first dynasty, guiding Egypt through a mythical age. Scholars often dismiss this as legend, but the pattern is familiar. In many ancient cultures, the earliest ages are ruled not by mortals, but by watchers, by sages, by giants, by star-born teachers. In Mesopotamia, they are the Apkallu. In India, the Rishis. In Mesoamerican myth, the gods walk the earth before the humans forget how to see them. Always there is a time before time when knowledge was given or perhaps preserved. And in Egypt, it was the Shemsu-Hor. But who were they? The phrase followers of Horus suggests not gods themselves, but attendants, caretakers, translators. Some fringe researchers believe the Shemsu-Hor were survivors of a lost civilization, a priestly class who preserved fragments of knowledge after a global cataclysm, that they wandered the earth after the Younger Dryas, rebuilding, planting seeds in places that would become sacred. It's a bold theory, but perhaps it's not meant to be literal. Perhaps the Shemsu-Hor are not a race or a people, but a role. Those who remember, those who carry the flame through the dark, those who teach what little remains of what once was whole. Even in mainstream archaeology, the rise of dynastic Egypt appears sudden, from scattered settlements to monumental architecture, in what feels like a blink. Writing appears fully formed. Artistic style is sophisticated. Mathematical proportions are encoded into early temple designs. It is as if the first pharaohs inherited a system, not slowly developed, but passed down, adopted, reclaimed. And if that's true, then perhaps we should take the old myths more seriously. Not as fact, but as framework. Not as fantasy, but as echo. Echoes are how stone remembers, and perhaps myths are how people do. The Shemsuhor are said to have reigned in the Zep Tepi, the first time, an age when the gods walked the earth and all was in balance. It is not dated. It is not named. It is only remembered in fragments. But its memory is tied to Giza. Some of the earliest temples refer to Giza not as a beginning, but as a sacred site already ancient, a place of resurrection, a hill of creation, a place where knowledge was kept. And who better to keep it than the Shemsuhor? The title itself may refer to a lineage, not by blood but by duty, a brotherhood of sorts. Initiates, astronomers, geographers, not kings but custodians. They would not need to build the pyramids, only to protect them, to align new structures with old, to trace the stars and remember when they matched the stones. And in that act, to preserve something not just for the present, but for the distant future, for us. Because perhaps the true function of the pyramid is not energy or burial or symbolism. Perhaps it is memory, a library without pages, a clock without hands, a message not of words but of form. And if we are meant to decode it, then the Shemsuhor were the first to understand what must be kept. In myths, they are never loud, they are quiet, present, but indistinct. The wind between dynasties, the shadow behind the throne. And that is perhaps the most powerful image of all, that long before Egypt as we know it, there were watchers, keepers, figures who walked silently among the sand, aligning stones with stars, encoding time into geometry, not for glory, not for empire, but for continuity, so that something might last, even when names are forgotten, even when languages fade, even when waters rise and sand returns. And so, stone by stone, memory was stored. Let us now return to those stones, to their textures, their fossils, their weight, and see what they might still be holding. Touch the limestone of the Great Pyramid, and you're not just touching human history, you're touching something much older. The stone itself is ancient, tens of millions of years old, formed at the bottom of a prehistoric sea. Embedded within it are the fossilized remains of creatures long vanished, microscopic shells, coral fragments, the ghostly outlines of marine life once suspended in warm water and light. These fossils are not rare, they are everywhere, in every block, every wall, every step. The pyramid is made quite literally of memory, not human memory, but Earth's memory. Time compacted into calcium and sand, raised into shape by hands whose own stories are now lost. And in a strange way the stone is dreaming of oceans, of currents and silt, of a time before humans ever walked the earth. Now it holds a different weight. Once it carried pressure from the sea, now it carries questions. We think of the pyramids as constructions, built, assembled, engineered. But they are also compositions, each block chosen, each placement deliberate. A material born of the ancient world, used to shape something that would defy the future. But why limestone? Why granite? Why these particular materials gathered at such great effort? Granite is harder, denser, and much more difficult to shape. And yet in the deepest parts of the Great Pyramid, in the King's Chamber, in the ascending passageways, granite dominates. It was brought from far to the south, from quarries at Aswan, transported somehow across hundreds of miles, lifted into place, aligned, tuned. Because granite is not just hard, it resonates. Rich in quartz, it responds to vibration, ringing slightly, holding sound. In the silence of the pyramid, you can feel this, a kind of subtle hum, almost beyond hearing, a pulse. Some have speculated that the combination of limestone and granite serves more than structure, that it was meant to hold or transmit something, not light, not electricity, but frequency, energy, memory. It's impossible to prove, but impossible not to feel. Run your hand along one of the lower stones at the base of the pyramid. It is warm in the sun, but cool in the shadows. It holds heat, but resists time. And in its texture, you can feel erosion not from human tools, but from wind and rain and the passing of thousands of years, and perhaps even more, because some of the blocks at Giza show signs of reuse, of having been cut, moved, or shaped more than once, as if the builders were not just constructing, but reclaiming, salvaging material from something older, like a memory carried forward, not by word, but by weight. And this opens yet another possibility, that parts of the pyramid, especially its deepest layers, may predate the culture that now claims them, that what we call Egypt may have been built atop something older, something quieter, something remembered not in myth, but in geology. It would not be the first time. In other parts of the world, ancient sites reveal similar mysteries. At Baalbek, massive foundation stones far outweigh the structures built on top. At Tiwanaku, megaliths seem older than the temples that surround them. At Göbekli Tepe, carvings rise from the ground long before pottery, writing, or the wheel. Always there is this pattern: stone, then silence, then civilization. And perhaps the pyramid is no different, a geological monument as much as a human one. And if we listen, not with ears but with time, the stones begin to whisper, not in language, but in layers, in lines of fossilized life, in smooth joints so tight they've not shifted in thousands of years, in walls that still stand despite earthquakes and wind and centuries of disbelief. We often say that the past is buried, but sometimes it is standing right in front of us, and it sleeps not in darkness, but in plain sight. The pyramids do not ask to be explained. They do not demand answers. They simply remain, enduring, unmoved, alive with silence. And in that silence there is room for wonder, for possibility, for all the things we do not yet understand. And as the stone dreams, we must ask, why have so many of these echoes been ignored? Why are some questions left unanswered or unasked at all? Let us now look not into the pyramid, but into ourselves and the ways we choose to forget. We think of history as a collection of facts, names, dates, ruins, artifacts. We imagine it as something permanent, etched into the record like chisel into stone. But history is not fixed. It is curated, and sometimes what is left out matters more than what is left in. The official timeline of Egypt begins with Nama, the unifier of Upper and Lower Egypt. Beyond him, darkness. An empty stretch labelled pre-dynastic, as though nothing of value existed before writing. But this assumption says more about us than it does about the past. Our systems of knowledge are built on what can be measured, catalogued, and verified. What cannot be proven is often ignored, or worse, ridiculed. And so when a chamber is found without hieroglyphs, it is called unfinished. When a structure has no grave goods, it must be symbolic. When a block of granite shows grooves that our tools cannot easily replicate, we say it was worn by time. This is not deceit, it is comfort. Because to accept the possibility of a forgotten chapter, of a civilization older than we allow, would mean rewriting not just Egypt's past, but our own. And yet, here it is. Massive stonework with no clear origin. Mathematics embedded in temples long before they were supposed to be known. Myths that speak of ages long before history began. Names of kings who reigned for thousands of years, dismissed as exaggeration. All of this exists, but most of it remains on the margins, not because it is false, but because it is inconvenient. Institutions thrive on consensus. Careers are built on defending the known. To step beyond the accepted model is to risk funding, reputation, credibility. And so even scholars who see the gaps tread carefully. They couch their wonder in footnotes, they whisper their questions, they wait. Sometimes forgetting is a choice, not always deliberate, but slow, cultural, inherited. We do not teach the possibility of a flood that resets civilization. We do not explore the symbolic weight of Orion and Sirius across cultures separated by oceans. We do not ask what kind of society thinks in 26,000-year cycles. And yet the evidence lingers. In architecture, in myth, in the alignments of monuments to solstices and equinoxes long past, in the idea that the ancients were not primitive, but precise. To admit this would not destroy history, it would expand it. It would mean accepting that what we know is only part of the story, and that the rest lies beneath sand, sea, and silence. But silence, too, is a kind of memory. The pyramid does not shout, it endures, it waits, not to be solved, but to be approached, to be asked, gently, what it remembers. We live in a world where knowledge is fast, information spreads instantly, but understanding takes time, and perhaps that's why we resist the older truths. They are too slow, too quiet. They ask us to sit in uncertainty. But the ancients may have lived in that uncertainty. To them the stars were not distant. They were cycles, clocks, signs. And the earth beneath their feet was not inert. It was memory made solid, a surface echoing with deeper time. We build on top of that now. We pour foundations into layers we do not examine. We pass by inscriptions we no longer read. We name things and move on. But naming is not knowing, and so the pyramid stands, a monument not just to what was built, but to what was lost, to all the things we once knew and chose to forget. We are not the first to wonder. For centuries, travellers and scholars alike have stood at the base of Giza, awed and puzzled. Some called it a tomb, some a temple. Others said it was a relic of Atlantis, a memory of the gods, a time capsule. And perhaps they were all right or all wrong, because the pyramid does not answer. It receives, it reflects, it listens. And perhaps that is what makes it so powerful, that in its silence it holds space for every version of the past we have yet to imagine. Let us walk now into those cycles themselves, into the rhythms of the heavens that repeat across ages, and the possibility that what we call history is not a straight line, but something much older and far more circular. We are taught to see time as an arrow, straight, narrow, and always pointing forward. History moves, we say, from primitive to advanced, from darkness to light, from myth to science, from then to now. But not all cultures agreed. In ancient India, the yugas turned like wheels, great cosmic seasons of birth, decay, and renewal. In Mesoamerica, the Maya spoke of previous worlds, each one ending in fire, water, or silence. The Greeks remembered golden ages followed by silver, then bronze, then iron, each one a step down from a forgotten perfection. Time, for them, did not advance. It circled. And perhaps the builders of the pyramids saw it the same way. To build for eternity, you must think in cycles. You must imagine not only tomorrow, but 10,000 years from now. You must align your work not with trends or kings, but with the stars, because the stars return. The Great Year, a concept found in multiple ancient systems, describes the 26,000-year cycle of precession. The slow wobble of Earth's axis causes the equinox points to shift backward through the constellations. It is subtle, barely noticeable, but over centuries it redraws the sky. To observe this is to be patient, to track it is to remember, and to encode it in stone is to believe that someone, someday, will understand. The ancient Egyptians spoke often of Zep Tepi, the first time, a golden era when the gods ruled on earth, when balance reigned, when the stars were aligned. But what if Zep Tepi was not a beginning, but a return? Not the first moment in a linear history, but the last moment of a previous cycle. What if the pyramid was built not to mark a new age, but to preserve what survived the end of the last one? There is a difference between building to impress and building to endure. The pyramids, stripped of gold, of name, of ornament, still remain. Not because of their symbolism, but because of their structure, because they were tuned to something deeper than time. In the West, we often see fallen civilizations as failed, collapsed. But collapse is not always failure. It can be part of a cycle. Forests burn and regrow, stars explode and seed galaxies. Civilizations fall and leave behind echoes. Not every cycle brings advancement. Sometimes it brings forgetting. A people who once built in granite may later build in clay. A society that once mapped the stars may forget how to read them. A language written in stone may outlast the voice that spoke it. And so we return again to the pyramids. They do not belong neatly on a timeline. They resist classification. Too advanced for their time. Too silent for their status. Too durable for their supposed age. They sit like anchors, pinning the memory of a previous world to the floor of this one. And perhaps that's why we feel something when we stand before them. Not just awe, but recognition. A faint familiarity, as if we've been here before, because cycles do not forget. They return. Always. The rains that once fed the Sahara may come again. The stars that once rose behind the Sphinx will rise again. And the questions we ask now will be asked again. Maybe not in the same language. Maybe not in the same world. But the rhythm continues. The ancients understood this. They did not seek to explain everything. They sought to participate in it, to mark the solstice, not define it, to align with Orion, not own it, to inscribe their presence into the turning wheel, not to stop it, but to join it. And perhaps that is the truest legacy of the pyramid, not its height, not its mystery, but its quiet humility before time. It does not try to be eternal, it simply endures. A shape tuned to the sky and to the earth, and through it perhaps we remember not only what has been lost, but what always returns. And now we return to where we began, to the starlit plateau, to the hush before dawn, to the pyramid itself. Let us take these final steps in silence, beneath the gaze of eternity. The sky has darkened again, not into night, but into that hushed liminal hour just before first light. You are standing once more on the edge of the Giza Plateau. There is no crowd, no noise, only the soft hiss of wind sliding over stone. The pyramid rises beside you, not golden now, not lit by the desert sun, but cold, grey, still. It seems to disappear into the dark sky, its edges blurring with shadow, its peak lost to the fading stars. And yet it feels alive, not in the way living things breathe, but in the way old things endure. You've walked through thousands of years to reach this place. You've passed through floods and deserts, stars and stone, through myth and memory, through what we know and what we only sense. And now, standing here, something stirs in you, not knowledge exactly, but something quieter, recognition, reverence, stillness. You can feel the weight of the earth beneath your feet, the pulse of time, the echo of all who came before. It is said that the Great Pyramid was once capped with gold, a shining point to catch the sun's first light, to connect heaven and earth. Now that cap is gone, but the structure remains, rooted, unmoving, waiting. We've tried to explain it in so many ways. A tomb, a symbol, a marvel, a mystery. Perhaps it is all of those things, and none. Perhaps it is not an answer, but an offering, a question shaped in stone, a reminder that even when memory fades, something stays. The wind shifts, low across the sand, and from the east, the light begins to rise. The first thread of dawn cuts across the horizon, turning black to blue, and for a moment the pyramid seems to glow, not with reflected sunlight, but with something older, something buried deep within its stones, a kind of presence. The Sphinx watches in silence. Orion fades, and once more the world begins again. You breathe slowly, the air is cool, the sky lightens, and the pyramid remains as it always has. It has watched gods rise and fall. It has stood through drought, war, empire, and forgetting. It has held its breath through floods and silence, and all the noise of modern time. And still it waits, not for discovery, not for proof, but for someone to be still enough to listen, because some things are not meant to be solved. Some things are meant to be remembered, not with data, but with wonder, not with certainty, but with stillness, not as history, but as presence. And perhaps that is what the pyramid truly is. A memory you cannot explain, a silence you cannot ignore, a shape that turns your gaze upward and inward and backward and forward all at once. The light spreads gently across the stones now. The top catches the sun, and then the rest. The shadows retreat. But something in you does not. Something lingers in that in-between, where time folds, where stories blur, where the question stays. Were the pyramids really built before the Ice Age? Perhaps, perhaps not. But in the end, the answer may not matter as much as the question itself. The question is, what opens the door? What keeps the memory alive? What keeps the silence from being empty? And in that silence, in that stillness, there is peace, there is sleep, there is wonder. Drift now with these thoughts as the stars above echo stories long forgotten. Good night.